So good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kathy Graper. I'm the Vice President of the Application Solutions Group at Keller Schroeder. A little bit about me. I've been with the company for over 25 years, starting as a COBOL developer a long time ago, and survived Y2K, learned Java, and then managed some global projects for a manufacturing firm for about 12 years before assuming my current role. Glad that everyone has joined us today, and excited to hear about our new partnership with Eradani. And I'm going to do a quick rundown of our agenda today. I think if I can get my slide to move forward. There we go. All right, so again, we'll talk about the relevance of our Keller Schroeder and Eradani partnership, and then I will turn it over to Dan, and he's going to go through some topics relevant to the IBM I today. Myth versus reality, integration, mobile, web, IoT, open source, web service API, controlling DevOps changes, and then we will have time at the end for some Q&A. So if you have questions as we're going through Dan's discussion today, please post those in the chat, and then we'll have time at the end to try to get you some answers for those. So for those that don't know us, who is Keller Schroeder? We are an employee-owned company. We've been in business for over 40 years, established in 1978 by Jim Keller and John Schroeder. They were a couple IBM guys that kept running into each other, making calls, and they thought, you know what, we can do this a little bit better if we did it together. So they formed the company actually on the foundation of our applications group. So 40 plus years later, we're still going strong, thankfully. We also have three other business areas. We have our data strategy group that we launched a year ago. Their tagline is manage data, do science, get better. They have data architects and engineers, and we have a PhD data scientist in that group. We also have an infrastructure business area, and that's comprised of our select account managers, our product sales team, inside product managers, and we also, through that group, have our network services group and do handle selling hardware. We are a VAR for IBM I, IBM products, and we have an IBM I system engineer. He's actually in the room with me today, but he didn't want to be on video, so he's a little bit in the corner. Kyle Creasy is his name, and you'll see his contact information at the end. And we have a staffing group as well. So our staffing group handles our internal recruiting and HR function, and also helps our clients do recruiting, contract to hire, direct hire placements, and actually has found and staffed currently some COBOL developers on the IBM I for a finance firm here in Evansville. So a little bit more back on our applications group. That really is where we see the majority of our relationship with Eradani as we go into the future. Also in the room with me today, again, hiding in the corner, one of the directors in our applications group, Ray Pritchett, is here, and you'll see his contact information later too. So Ray is a strong advocate of the IBM I platform, has been for years, and he's nodding his head yes as I'm speaking. So and we think that across those four business areas, it really makes us what we consider a full IT shop. Kind of reflect an IT shop, if you will, within a company. We're not just a consulting firm that focuses on one area. We believe across those four areas, it makes us unique in the technology consulting space. I do have on the slide a sampling of engagements. I'm not going to read all those, but I did want to just call out that those are across multiple verticals. So we are not just siloed. We do have a lot of clients that are in the manufacturing space, in the banking and finance space, in the utility space, and a lot of the business things that we have done have been across multiple verticals. I am at this time going to hand it over to Dan. As I do that, I wanted to let you know a little bit about Dan. Dan Magid is the CEO of Eradani, and he is a true IBM champion. Dan has spent over 30 years leading companies that help customers implement new technologies in legacy environments. Previously, Dan led worldwide software development groups that built highly successful modernization and DevOps tools, and was the CEO of Aldon, the leading provider of DevOps tools in the IBM I marketplace. So with that, I am going to hand the presentation over to Dan. And Dan, it should now be all yours.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kathy. Let
Welcome.
me go ahead and share my screen here. Great. Thanks. Okay, so welcome everybody to this webinar on how to make the most of your IBM I. We're going to talk about a lot of the things that you can do with the IBM I that you may not be familiar with. We've been working with IBM I users now for probably close to 4 decades, and we've seen the system evolve, but it's really evolved a great deal in the last year and a half or 2 years. So there's lots and lots of new things that you can do, and we're going to talk about that. So we're going to talk about how do you create the latest user experiences for your IBM I. So when people say, gee, I don't like looking at the green screen anymore, you can say, well, on the IBM I, we can do anything you want. We can create whatever user experience you'd like to see. Or if you want to take advantage of big data analytics or machine learning to get insights into your business, you can do that with the IBM I. You want to take advantage of open source, you can do that on the IBM I. You want to start hooking up devices in the field to your IBM I through the Internet of Things, you can do that with the IBM I. Or you want to move things up into the cloud, you can move things up into the cloud with the IBM I. Or you want to connect with your business partners, with your customers via web services, you can do that with the IBM I. So we're going to talk about how you can start to take advantage of all those capabilities with that proven IBM I system. Now, when you think about what is getting in the way of people doing this stuff, when I talk to people out in the field about their IBM I often run into what I call the mythical IBM I, which is over here on the left side of the screen. And that is that people tell me that IBM I is a green screen system that's limited to RPG and COBOL, DB2 database, and basically that's all you can do with it. So if we want to do something new, we're going to have to move to a different platform. We're going to have to go to a different place in order to get the new cool things that we want to be able to do. And that's just simply not accurate. Over on the right side is actually the real IBM I, the IBM I that can do open source. You can run any kind of open source in the IBM I that you can run anywhere else. You can create the latest, coolest, neatest user interfaces on your IBM I. You can hook your IBM I up to Internet of Things. And you can do that and take advantage of what is still one of the most advanced operating architectures in the industry today. When you think about your IBM I, it's got an object-oriented operating system. Well, you're just seeing now companies like Amazon moving to an object-oriented environment, an object-oriented operating environment for their systems. We see companies like Google with huge amounts of storage, and they're just now moving to this idea of single level storage where everything is the same, whether it's memory, whether it's disk storage, whether it's flash memory, all of it looks the same to the system. So they're moving to something that, again, we've had in the IBM I for decades. We've got built-in security. The security is actually built in at the operating system level rather than being software that runs on top of the operating system. So it's a system that you can really secure from attacks because the security is built right into the operating system. The high-level machine interface, which allows you to change out the hardware without worrying about how that might impact your software. And then the integrated database. So all of that makes the IBM I a fabulous platform for doing things. What we haven't seen is taking advantage of new technology with the IBM I. And so we're going to talk about all of the things that you actually can do with your IBM I. The problem is that a lot of us are in this situation where we have so many things to do to enhance our applications, to fix bugs in our application. We've got so many things on the backlog that we don't have the time to step back and say, okay, how do I get started with this new technology? How do I start taking advantage of all of the things that I can do with my IBM I? And that's really the objective of the Keller Schroeder Eradani partnership. That's to help you, knowing that you've got this huge backlog of things to do, to help you get started, to help you do these things, and to give you some additional resources to get those projects done. Now, one of the things that also gets in the way is in the IBM I world, we have been comfortable. Now, this is one of my favorite books that I've read recently. It's called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And the thesis of this book is that you want to be anti-fragile, meaning you want to be an organization that thrives on change rather than a fragile organization that is threatened by change. So in the book, basically the author makes the point that anything that has more upside than downside from random events or shocks is anti-fragile. So in other words, things that take advantage of change rather than being threatened by change are things that are anti-fragile. And then down below that, he says, crucially, anti-fragility is the property of all those natural and complex systems that have survived. Depriving these systems of volatility, randomness, and stressors will harm them. What's interesting to me about that is what he's saying is that if you don't have to react to change, you get comfortable, and in the long term, that's threatening to your health. And in some ways, that's what's happened to us in the IBM I world, because way back when I first started with IBM I, IBM told you, if you write an application for your system 34 in RPG2, we will ensure that application will always run. So no matter what happens, we'll make sure that you'll always be able to run that application. So for years and years and years and years, we've been able to stay comfortable running the applications we've written. Whereas in the rest of the world, every time something changed, they'd have to rewrite their application. So we have been protected from that volatility. The problem is now that is threatening the health of our IBM I ecosystem because we haven't had to move forward. So now it's time for us to say we really need to move forward. So we want to be able to be one of those organizations that thrives in that sort of highly volatile, rapidly changing world. And so, we want to move from being fragile, that is threatened by change, to anti-fragile, where we actually look forward to and take advantage of change. In a fragile organization, you find that people are resistant to change. And we see this sometimes in the IBM I world, where people say, you know what, I like working with my green screen. Everything works great there. So I'm going to just stay where I am, versus an organization that thrives on change. Now, a lot of people think that it's the IBM I itself that is resistant to change versus open systems, which are always changing. When the reality is actually the IBM I platform itself has proven to be anti-fragile. So the IBM lab in Rochester has done an amazing job of making all of this new technology available to us. The problem is more our culture, where we have become accustomed to being comfortable in the technology we're in. So what we're looking to do now is to say, how do we break out of that and really start taking advantage of all of the wonderful things that the IBM I lab has done for us and made available to us on our IBM I? So how do we take advantage of all of the things that you might be able to do with your IBM I in the new technology arena? When you're looking at modernizing systems, you have a few different options of how do you proceed. So how do I move forward if what I want to do is modernize my system? So, one is, gee, I can go out and throw everything out that I have and buy something new. The problem with that is that in those IBM I applications that you've built over all those decades, you have built a huge amount of domain knowledge about your business into those applications. Think about the hundreds and hundreds of conversations you've had with end users where they've said, can you add this field to the screen? Or can you make this process work a little bit different? Or give me this information on a report. So you've added things and added things and added things to tailor that application to your business. You go out and buy something new, you're going to have to go through that process all over again, because you're going to get something that's sort of like your business, but it's not really tuned to how you do business, because it's the unique things about how you do business that makes you successful, that makes your company successful. Or you could go out and say, well, let's build something new from scratch. But building something new from scratch is highly risky, and you never quite know what you're going to end up with, because by the time you get to the 3 to 5 to 10 years that it might take you to rebuild these comprehensive applications, the business will have moved. And so whatever it is you were thinking of doing today, it's probably not going to be the right thing for where your business is going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So building new can be very expensive and very difficult. So the final option is incrementally starting to move your system forward. So take advantage of all of that investment you have in those existing applications and just start to add the new functions as you need them. So look at what are the priorities, what are the things that our users really need, and let's start adding that to our system incrementally. And I like this approach because modernization is not a one-time thing. So it's not something you do it and you're done, put a web interface on my application and now I'm done. Technology is going to continue to change, and you're going to have to continue to move things forward. And so you're going to have to continue to do these incremental changes as things move forward. I was talking to a customer just a few days ago who is modernizing their Java system. So they built a Java application around their IBM I system about 10 years ago, and now they're having to modernize that. So things that we think of modern today, a few years down the road, are not going to be so modern anymore, and we're going to be modernizing them again. Because the constant in our industry is that things will keep changing. So we want to be able to keep moving things forward. So we want to make sure we're in the position to be able to take advantage of things as they change. When people ask me, well, so gee, there's so much to do, how do I get started? I always say, start out with what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the biggest challenge you face right now that we could actually make an impact on by doing something with the new technology? So don't just modernize just to modernize. It's what is the problem I'm trying to solve and for whom? So for example, one of the most popular things we hear is we need to provide leading edge user experiences for our end users, for our customers, for our business partners. And so people are complaining about working through the green screen, or they like to work through a new user interface, or we want to hire young people and they don't want to look at a green screen. So how do we get a new leading edge user interface to make the experience of working with our applications the best possible experience it can be? Problem is, if we want to rewrite our entire application to try to do that, it would be monstrously expensive. So how do we incrementally change our system so that we can get that new user experience? And by the way, Gartner Group used to say that the way to modernize these IBM I and mainframe systems was to replace them. They're no longer saying that. Their latest report says, before you think about doing something like replacing the system, think about the risks and the cost, because the risks are high, the costs are going to be much more than you think. Look first at, can I leverage my existing application and add things to it to make it more modern? The other thing I hear a lot, and in fact, I spoke at the Common Executive Conference about a year and a half ago, and the number one issue of the CEOs, CFOs, and CIOs that were at that conference, the number one issue is, what am I going to do when my IBM I skilled people start retiring? How am I going to continue to maintain these applications? So how do I ensure the future maintainability of the applications that they have? So what are the things I can do to make sure that I'll be able to continue maintaining these applications into the future? We also have a lot of customers where they have their IBM I development group, and then they've also got an open systems group and the open systems group, they're developing web applications, they're developing new capabilities, but they still need the data and the functions from the IBM I. So how do I integrate that new development I'm doing along with the traditional development I've done on my IBM I? And then I have customers who say, our business is becoming more and more integrated with the businesses of our partners and customers. We're doing much more in a machine-to-machine kind of conversation. How do I integrate my applications with the applications from my business partners? So how do I make those things work together? And then a lot of customers are saying, gee, my competitors are getting out in front of me because they have better insights into what's happening in the market. How do I get insights into my business? How do I look at the data that we have and this incredibly valuable information that we've collected over many, many years? How do we look at that data in order to get important insights into why our customers buy from us, or what are the best ways to provide our products to our customers? What are the things that work best in our marketplace? So we want to be able to get those kinds of insights out of all of that data that we've collected on our IBM I. I was talking to a customer just a couple of days ago who told me that they have 4.5 petabytes of historic data. I said, is that unstructured data like videos and documents? He said, no, that is actually structured data in their database. So they've got a massive amount of information about their business that they really want to say, how do I get insights out of all of that data? Now, one of the things we run into when we talk to IBM I users is that there's this divide in their organizations. So they've got their IBM I experts. They've got the people who really understand the IBM I, and they understand the RPG applications or the COBOL applications. They understand how all that works. They understand how it's related to the business. You know, I was talking to a woman recently who told me she'd been working on the same application for 42 years. So she really knows that application, and she knows how it works with the business. So she has all of that domain knowledge. And we see a lot of that out in the RPG world. So people know their applications, they know how it applies to the business, they understand the IBM I, and they understand how the IBM I works. And it works in the sort of way that as I need capacity, I scale it up, I make it bigger in order to get more capacity. And if I'm managing my development, we typically do that with process-oriented DevOps, meaning in the IBM I world, we always think of change management as a process of moving code from development to test to QA to production, managing and automating that process. On the open system side, you've got a lot of people who understand all these new technologies. You know, they understand Python, they understand JavaScript, they understand PHP and .NET. So they know those technologies. They know how to build mobile applications. They're familiar with the open source tools like Git and Jenkins and Jira and the different kinds of tools you use in the open source world. They know how to manage networks of machines because typically you scale out in this environment where you add machines rather than adding additional capability to your machine to get more capacity. And they're used to creating tool chains for DevOps where they take a version control tool like Git and a build management tool like Bamboo or like Jenkins, and a scripting tool like Jenkins, things that you can use for actually creating the scripts that do your builds for you. And they're used to tying all those tools together into a DevOps tool chain. So what you have is you have these two groups that think very, very differently about how the systems work, and yet you need them both to work together in order to create this modern IBM I environment. And once you do integrate them, you can do some very, very cool stuff. So you can create modern self-service user dashboards. So instead of having a green screen that has 6 or 7 or 8 different panels with data on them in order to find the information you want, you can create open source based dashboards for the user where they can get lots and lots of information, and they can have graphical elements, and they can get all of that information right from their IBM I. And this is an example, a real world example of a Node.js web app that's running on Linux, that's doing SQL queries to the database and actually calling RPG programs directly from JavaScript in order to provide this kind of a user experience for the end user. This is another example of a liquor distributor that wanted the ability to see information through a graphical user interface. They had actually literally 6 different panels to get this information, and every single panel was unbelievably packed. They had used every pixel on every screen in order to get all the data onto those 6 panels. By moving to a graphical user interface, they can now have a tabbed user interface where they can go and look at the information that they wanted in a much more organized, much more easy to read fashion. And IBM is doing this. Is IBM's cloud connector for IBM I, and this is again a native Node.js Angular application running on the IBM I that is executing IBM I commands. So it allows you to copy files from your IBM I. You can copy save files. You can copy individual files in the IFS and copy them up to S3 at Amazon or to the IBM I cloud. So you can, or to the IBM cloud. So you can move things from your IBM I to the cloud through a graphical user interface that's all built with Node, with Angular, and it's running natively on the IBM I. So there are lots and lots of things that customers are now doing with their IBM I because IBM has now made all of this kind of technology available. So we have customers who have their entire customer-facing website is completely fed by data and programs and functions that are happening on their IBM I. So for example, we have a customer that they want to take orders through their website, but their pricing algorithm is very, very complex. And when they do pricing for a customer, they have to know who the customer is because they get special discounts. They have to know what the product is because it has its own discount schedule. They need to know the volume so that they can do the volume discounting thing. If they have to check their specials to see if there are any specials. So all kinds of things happen. And that's all built in an RPG program. So it's all built in an RPG system for creating those quotes. But they have now hooked that up to the website so that you can enter the information into their website, and then it runs that RPG program to generate the quote. Another really popular thing we see is that people want their salespeople in the field to be able to get information about inventory, about quotes directly on a mobile device. And so again, you can hook your mobile device right up to your IBM I. And I talked a little bit about internal, external application integration, where you want to be able to integrate your application with something going out on the web. So for example, maybe you want to go out to the weather system and get some weather information, or you want to go out to Google Maps and get some geo information, geolocation information for your application. So you can integrate those functions into your IBM I apps. Or you want to hook up to something like Watson, to the big data analytics kinds of engines, the machine learning engines. Or we're seeing more and more that people have in their warehouses. They have natural language programs that are instructing warehouse workers where to go and what to get, and they speak back to it. So you can do that with your IBM I, and you can connect your IBM I to the cloud. So all of these things are being done today on the IBM I. Now, if you're going to take advantage of this, open source is going to be in your future. So you're going to be using or taking advantage of open source in order to get these kinds of capabilities. So why? Why do you need to go? What's the reason to get into open source? Well, one of the great things about open source is a lot of it's free. You can just download it and integrate it into your applications and start using it. It's also very, very fast. So you can build applications very, very quickly in open source. And the reason is that you are building applications from pre-built components. So you can download components and add them to your application. And there are literally millions and millions and millions of pre-built components. You know, we had a customer recently that said, you know, they want to connect to FedEx's transportation or shipment tracking system directly from their IBM I application. We did a quick search on the web, and the components to do that, they already exist. All you had to do was call the component, pass it the information. You didn't have to write any of the code to call the FedEx interface. So all of that's built for you. If you want to connect to Google Maps, you want to connect to the weather, you want to connect to government websites, a lot of those functions are already built for you. So you've already got these connectors that are already built. You can even download entire applications. You can go onto GitHub and you can download an ERP system. Now, it may not do what you want, but you can download it and use it for free. There's also a huge library of pre-built user interface components. So you want a slider on your screen, you want a chart, you want a graph, you can just download widgets that do that for you. Or you can just pull the code down. There are snippets of code that you can say, I want that code, and you can just integrate it into your own programs. So instead of having to write everything from scratch, you can assemble an application by grabbing the parts that you need. And just to give you an example, our team actually built that cloud storage solutions interface for IBM. So we built that for them. We built both a green screen interface that allow you to copy files from the IBM I up to the cloud, and we built the Node.js Angular interface. The green screen interface took us 9 months to build because we had to write everything. We had to write the connectors to S3. We had to write the user interface. We had to write everything. With the open source stuff, we simply pulled down all the components to do that. It took us 4 days. So it took us 4 days to create the whole user experience on the open source side. It took us 9 months to do it on the green screen side. And what's great is that those applications, those components are being tested. You can actually go in and look, and I'll show you an example of this, but you can see how many times is this component being downloaded. And these open source components are being used by some of the largest corporations in the world to add to their system. So you can bet that they have been through rigorous testing processes. So you just look and you see how often is this thing being used, and that'll give you a sense of how reliable and how well tested it is. There's also very sophisticated tooling to make it easy to keep all that stuff up to date so that you can get all the latest versions of the application. And these languages are very popular. I'm going to show you a chart in a minute where you can see what the most popular languages are, but they're very popular, so it's easy to find skilled developers. So as you start to add capabilities using these technologies, you're now adding technology that will be easy to maintain over the years because it's easy to find developers. And now there are easy ways to integrate with your IBM I native applications and data, and we're going to talk about that in some more detail in just a minute. So these are just some examples. So this is a GitHub screen, and I talked about how you could download an entire ERP system. So I just did a search here on GitHub for ERP, and we can see there's a bunch of ERP systems that you can download. And you can say, you know what, I only want to see the ones that are written in Python, or just show me the ones written in JavaScript, and you can get that list of ERP systems that maybe you can download. Or so here I did a search on IBM Watson. You know, I want to hook up my system to IBM Watson. And again, I get a whole bunch of components already written that allow me to hook up my IBM I applications to Watson. And over here, you know, you can see that you're getting the stars just like you would for, you know, for buying things on Amazon. You can see how many people like it, you know, what language it's written in. You want to hook up to Google Maps? I did a quick search on Maps. Again, lots and lots of pre-built components, pre-built connectors written in a variety of languages to allow me to get information from the Google Maps API. So I don't have to write the code to do that. And then these are just Angular. If you're working in Angular, this is a place you can go to grab Angular user interface components. You want a table, you want, you know, buttons, you want sliders, you want pop-ups and modal windows, you want tree controls. You just download all the code to do it and pop it into your program and you're done. You don't have to write all of that code. And this is just an example of actually going in and saying, you know what, actually, I don't want to take the whole component. I just want to get some code that I can then maintain. So you can just grab a code snippet and work with that. So it makes it very, very easy to build applications, and you can do it really, really fast. So when you're thinking about the next enhancement you want to make to your system, you might want to think about, do I really want to do that in RPG, or do I want to do that in an open source language? Are there things that I might be able to do more productively in open source? Now, RPG is a great language for building business systems, transaction processing systems. So there are times RPG is absolutely the right solution, but there are other times you might want to look and see, is there an open source solution that might allow me to get to where I want to go faster? And I talked a little bit about how these things are well tested. This is just an example of a component. This is Express, which is the most popular framework for Node applications. Notice it's being downloaded almost 14 million times a week. So you can imagine this thing is being used a lot. It's being tested a lot. So this is a component you know you can rely on. It's being used in, again, the largest corporations in the world. So you know that this is going to be something that will be safe if I integrate this into my application. And again, I talked about this. This is, again, native Node.js and Angular running on IBM I for their cloud storage solutions. So this will just give you a sense when you start thinking about what languages do I want to work in doing my open source development, you can see how popular things are. And popularity is important in that it's easier to find developers in the popular languages. It also just tells you how easy they are to adopt. So things that are easy to adopt tend to get adopted faster. So you can see how fast these things are moving. So for example, you can see at the top of the list here is JavaScript. It's on GitHub, the most popular language for development. But if you also look down here below, you can see this big diagonal upward swing for TypeScript. TypeScript is just enterprise ready JavaScript. So it's just another kind of JavaScript language. So, and it's growing very, very quickly. So JavaScript is a great thing for building web applications, but each language has particular strengths. If you're going to do data analytics, there are more components and more things built in Python. Python becomes a great language if you want to do data analytics. Java, if you're building real enterprise-ready applications, Java is a great language to do that. PHP has been one of the most popular languages on the IBM I for a long time because early on, there were connectors, Zen made connectors for connecting PHP to the IBM I. So there's lots of PHP on the IBM I. So there are lots of things that go into deciding what's the best language for me to use to do this open source development. Now, the other thing you want to think about is the actual structure of your applications. As I talked about before, how you want to be anti-fragile. You want to be able to move quickly into new technologies and take advantage of emerging opportunities. The problem we have is the applications we've built over decades. And when we first started building these things back in the late 1970s, early 80s, people were not really thinking about how fast technology might move and, gee, I might have to modernize these applications. They were just trying to get these applications up and running. A lot of these applications were built for the first computer systems that companies were using. And so you're just trying to figure out, how do I create the best application possible? I'm not thinking about, how do I make sure that I'm going to be able to move into new technology as things change? So those applications weren't really designed for today's business environment. We built these huge monolithic programs for the IBM I, where there's a very chatty interface between the user interface and the code in the back end. So the interface and the code are very, very tightly integrated, and also tightly integrated with the database. The screen had a fixed size of 80 columns, and I love asking young people, why do you think it's 80 columns wide? And then I explained to them, because a punch card was 80 columns wide. So they wanted, since the screen was basically early on just used for data entry, they made the screen look kind of like a punch card with the same width as a punch card. The IBM I was originally designed to run in isolation from other systems. It wasn't designed to run originally in this networked environment. Of course, that's changed dramatically now, but originally it was designed to run in isolation from everything else. The applications had very, very structured fixed workflows that you would go through in order to run a business process. And you had one accessibility option, and that was the green screen. That was basically the only way to get at the system. So how do we change the architecture of these systems to make sure that we can take advantage of whatever might come down the pike? And whenever I talk about this, I like to show this memo that came out back in 2002 originally from Jeff Bezos about Amazon. And a lot of people point to this as the thing that has made Amazon so agile, that's made it possible for them to move into new businesses so quickly. Basically, he sent out this memo that said, all teams will henceforth expose their data and functionality through services interfaces, meaning there will be a service interface to every function. So that if I need to use that function somewhere else, I just call it through that service interface. And then talks a little bit more about some of the technologies, but down at the end, I like the last two. It says, anybody who doesn't do this will be fired, and thank you, have a nice day. Right, so this is a corporate directive that was going to be enforced. This is how you're going to build things. And so Amazon has built this massive inventory of reusable components with services interfaces. So when they move into a new business, they can simply reuse the components, rearrange them, and use them for the new business. So they can move very, very quickly into new businesses and take advantages of opportunities. So you want to make sure, if you're going to be anti-fragile, if you're going to thrive on change, that you have the structure in place so that as things change, you can take advantage of whatever the opportunities might arise from that change. So the idea is create a services layer around the stuff you have in your IBM I, so that if I need to create new enhancements in open source languages, or I want a new mobile application that talks to my IBM I, or I need a web browser interface, or I need to integrate with my business partners, I can do that through that services layer and call directly into all those very, very valuable assets I have on my IBM I, those programs, the database, all of the information I have on the IBM I. But I can do that using standards from the open source world and get at my IBM I functions and data. And that's really sort of what Eradani's focus is. What our focus is providing that connector layer so that I can do all these new cool things with my IBM I. And I don't have to really learn about the other environment, meaning if I'm an open source developer, I can build a Node Angular application. And when I need something from the IBM I simply call it the way I'm used to calling something, and Eradani Connect will translate that into something the IBM I understands, like a program call with parameters, or a database call, or a stored procedure call. We translate that in, and then we pass back, when we get the result, we pass the result back to the open source calling program in a way they understand, so as JSON or XML, so they get back what it is that they're looking for. Same thing if you want to talk to public services to take advantage of machine learning or big data analytics or publicly available web services. All you need to do is call out to that via RPG. So you can write an RPG program that calls another program with parameters, and Eradani Connect will translate that into a web service call and then translate the JSON data back into parameters for your RPG program. So you have the ability to connect to all these different technologies so that you can transform your existing applications. And this is actually a real world example of a green screen. This is what the green screen looked like. Originally, they had run just a transformation tool to transform from the green screen to a web user interface. But what they didn't like about that was, although it was really, really fast, it created a user interface for them that to them looked like a green screen in a web user interface. What they wanted was rather a native web user interface. So what they did is they built instead an open source based web user interface using JavaScript and using React on the IBM I to expose that data. So they have now a native modern web user interface, and it's of course responsive so that you can get it also on a mobile device. So in order to do that, in order to make that happen, what we needed to do is start moving to a more modular, flexible architecture where we can get at individual program modules. We can get at the data we need to get to. Now, in the IBM I world, we did that already with the business logic to the data. You know, way back when we decided that we didn't want the data descriptions deeply embedded in the business logic. So we went to externally described files. And we want to do the same thing now with the user interface. How do we separate that user interface from the business logic? And I don't know if any of you remember these, but I do. This is RPG coding forms. And if you look here in my input specification, I'm actually describing the data. So it's actually in the program itself. That's originally what we did, is we had the data descriptions right inside the programs. The problem is, if you change the data, you'd have to go find every program where that data existed and change them to reflect the new data. So we went to externally described files. So we separated the data descriptions from the programs themselves so that we could be more flexible. We could make changes to the data without having to worry about changing all the programs that use it. So again, we want to do the same kind of thing for the user interface so that we can use whatever user interface technology we want to use and access our business logic so we can change the user interface without worrying about what's happening in the business logic. So you now have this separation between the presentation layer, between the business logic, and then the data that you're accessing. Now, once you start creating this kind of an environment where you're using tons and tons of open source with your IBM I, you need to have a way to manage all of that. So how do I manage that kind of a mixed environment? So I've got all of these different kinds of components that I need to manage. So, you know, I have JavaScript code, I've got Java code, I've got Python, I've got RPG, CL, DB2. I've got all this stuff. How do I manage all of that? And then I might have all of the open source tools in my environment. You know, I've got developers who are using Git or GitHub for source control. They're using Jenkins or Bamboo or Maven to do their builds. They're doing development from Visual Studio Code or from an Eclipse or a rational development tool. And then we're using issue tracking tools like Jira for keeping track of things. We've got this huge mix of things that we need to manage. So the idea is now, how about using those open source tools for my IBM I code? So I can now integrate my IBM development with the DevOps from the rest of the organization. So I can develop my native IBM I stuff, but I can use those same tools that I'm using for open source. So why Git? Well, it's the most popular tool out there for doing version control. It gives you that single repository across all your environments. It's got a very, very powerful versioning or branching model. So you can have multiple versions of an application in development simultaneously. So you can keep separate the different tasks or projects you might be working on, and you can promote them individually. It has a very powerful merge capability to merge versions of applications together, and it's out of the box integrated with just about any development tool you can imagine. And it's also integrated with source scanning tools that look for license compliance, that look for security vulnerability. So it's all that's built in to Git. And then you would use Git as part of your process so that as you move things through a development lifecycle, you're getting the source from Git, but then doing your builds. And you can do this with a traditional IBM I change management system, where the traditional IBM I change management system is managing all the promotion processes. So it's doing all the stuff of moving things from development to test to quality assurance to production, but you're managing your source code in something like Git. So you can have your source code in Git and then have the IBM I tool doing all of the build stuff, doing all the stuff that you need for managing that build process. And you can also integrate it with issue tracking tools like Jira. So here's an example of a bunch of IBM I stuff. You can see these IBM I objects that are showing up in a Jira ticket. So right in the Jira ticket, you can see what are the IBM I objects that are being changed, and down below you can see what are people doing, checkouts, promotions, what are the kinds of things that they're doing with that IBM I code. So you get into this environment where you have a totally automated system across all of your platforms. So you can make all the changes that you need to make, and you can store your code in open source tools, and you can move them through some development lifecycle using your IBM I based kind of change management system, and deploy them to all the places that they need to go. And this is happening right now. This is a major manufacturer. So they're a large manufacturer, and they wanted to be able to provide their customers with up-to-minute information about deliveries. And they wanted the people right on the loading dock to see, where is the shipment? When is it coming in? Who do I have to have on the loading dock in order to unload? So they wanted to have people be able to get that from a mobile device. And at the time, the only way you could get it was through the green screen. So we created a bunch of APIs for them around their existing system, and we now have exposed them via Node.js and React, so they now can see all that information directly on their IBM I. And what they've done now is reduce the amount of time that it takes to respond to service calls. They've reduced the number of service calls because people can actually get at the information on a self-service kind of basis, and it makes people much, much happier to be able to do that. We're working with a large insurance company that needed to get information so that they could generate quotes. And part of the information they needed geolocation information directly from Google Maps. They had addresses in their database, but they had to get the actual geo coordinates, the latitude and longitude, from Google Maps. So they've now integrated that into their application, so they can send an address from their RPG application, and they get back the geolocation coordinates from Google Maps, which goes directly then into their database. It significantly reduces the amount of time needed in order to produce a quote, and it gives a cool function to their agents. So there are lots and lots of places you can go to start doing your work. You want to go and find components that you might use for whatever application you're building. You can go to npm.js, and that's where you find the JavaScript components. Or you can go to get Angular components. This is where those Angular user interface components are. You need Python components. You can go there. GitHub is really sort of the granddaddy of all of them. GitHub has millions and millions of components in all languages where you can go and you can grab them and you can download them. And then there are a whole bunch of classes available where you can get introductions into how to use these technologies. And Eradani and Keller Schroeder also offer services to help you get started with these technologies. So basically the idea here, and the idea of the partnership that we're talking about today, is that Eradani provides infrastructure, the connecting infrastructure, to make it easy to talk to your IBM I from these open source applications. And Keller Schroeder provides the kind of services that you might need in order to augment your own staff to create these new applications, to help you get started and help you build these leading edge user experiences and new capabilities. And these are just for, since you'll be getting the slides later, these are just contact people if you need to contact us later on. So with that, Kathy, I am going to turn things back to you to see if we have any questions.
Okay, so yeah, if you'll just keep the screen up you have there, and we do have some questions. And the first one is, how hard is it to set up my IBM I to use open source?
That's a great question. That's usually one of the first questions we get. So I want to start doing this stuff, but how hard is it to do? Well, one of the great things one of the first things is it depends what version of the operating system you're on. But if you are on 7.2 or later, it's actually very easy. IBM has put in support for what are called package managers. And so the package managers are things that pull down the packages that you need in order to run open source, or even those components that become part of your application. And so they now have Yum, and they have RPM, and they have NPM on the IBM I, and those are package managers. So all you have to do is say, install NPM, and it will bring down all the node stuff. If you want to do node development, it'll automatically pull down all the components you need. Yum is actually a sort of a macro package manager where it ensures that, yeah, you need these components for your application, but those components are dependent on a whole bunch of other components, and you're going to have to go get that. And it knows what all the dependencies are, so it ensures that you get all of the stuff that you need in order to make a working environment. But you can now get this set up with just a few commands and get your environment set up. And again, we can help you with that.
Okay, great. Here's another one. I'm a mid-level IT manager. I regularly find myself defending the platform. Any advice?
Yes, yeah. Recently I was with an IBM I customer, and they were telling me that they're getting all this pressure from executives to change out the system. And I said, why? And he said, well, one day the daughter of the owner walked through our bullpen and she saw the green screen. She said, why do we have all this old stuff? We need something new. So they never really thought about exactly why they want to do it. It's just that somebody didn't like seeing the green screen, and now they need to change everything. And so that's why I talk about this idea of the mythical IBM I versus the reality of the IBM I. The reality is you have a significant investment in those green screen applications and all of the logic, all of the programs that run your business. And it's been tuned very finely to how your business operates. So you don't want to throw away all of that value. You don't want to throw away all the value you've created over decades of building those applications. And you can do the latest things. You do not have to have a green screen interface. Now, there are times that green screens are actually very effective, but if that's the thing that's getting in the way, you can do the latest, coolest, neatest things on your IBM I. So again, what I always go and say, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? When you say you want to get off the platform, what is the issue? Is it you need a new user interface? Is it that you're worried about what's going to happen when the programmers retire? Because we really have great answers today to those kinds of concerns where we can say, actually, you're going to be better off modernizing the IBM I than trying to replace it with something else.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Here's another one from a manufacturer. We have devices on our plant floor that we might want to connect to our I, for example, IoT device. Have you done this sort of thing with your product?
So we're actually working with a customer right now where they have these handheld devices for entering information, and then they have Zebra printers, which are these little mobile printers. So they print tags, and so they have to put tags on items right there. So the people are walking around the plant floor, and the way they had been doing it is they actually had a green screen, a terminal emulator on those devices talking to their IBM I, but they wanted to go to a more modern user interface. And they had to have the printers actually physically hooked up to the device in order to print. And they wanted to be able to print wirelessly via Bluetooth. So that project was to actually tie those mobile devices, those devices that people and their Android devices, to the IBM I. So we do that through the services user interface, and then grab the generated report off the IBM I and then send it via Bluetooth to those Bluetooth printers. So yeah, exactly that kind of a use case.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for one more, maybe two, depending on the length of your answer. So okay. So here's the question. We've had a service-oriented architecture initiative underway for several years. MQ series is part of our architecture. Does your product offer any advantages in a scenario like this?
So it depending on what you're trying to do. So we actually have a whole infrastructure for doing asynchronous connection. What's great about MQ is it allows you to do asynchronous connections. One of the problems you have in talking to the web is that, and I think this is going to end up being a long answer, but one of the problems you have in talking to the web is that you never really know if it's going to be available, right? You could have your connection could be down, the web service could be down, you could have a slow connection. And so one of the things you want to try to do is create this asynchronous communication. So you can put out a request to something that has to happen on the web. And if the web service isn't running, that's fine. The requests get queued up. And when the web service comes back up, you can then start processing those requests. And same thing on the way back, you send information back. If the RPG program isn't in a place yet to get that information, you can send a whole bunch of results back and you can pick them up. So in Eradani Connect, we actually have the structure to do that kind of asynchronous communication. One of the really cool things that we've done in it is that when you get data back from the web, you never know exactly what you're going to get. You know, one of the great things about IBM I green screens is you control all the data entry. You know exactly what you're going to get because your display file is controlling what data comes in. When you're getting data from the web, you never know quite what you're going to get. And you may get, you know, one item, you may get a million items. You might get an array with one element, you might get an array with a million elements. You never quite know. And so when you build a data queue, the concern you have is, well, I have to have a fixed size record in the data queue. What happens if the record I get sent from the web is bigger than that? And so built into our connector is the ability to wrap records in a data queue so that even if you set this fixed size for your data queue, but the record you get back is bigger, we'll wrap it down to the next record and the next record, and we'll keep track of what actually makes up a result and then translate that back into parameter data, structured data for your IBM I. So you can do that kind of thing, you know, the same kind of thing that you're doing with MQ series, you can do that from Eradani Connect.
Okay, great. Well, we are almost at time, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it now and just thank everyone again for attending this morning. We appreciate your time. Hope you found something of value in it. We have recorded the session, so we will be posting it out on our website, and I bet Eradani will be doing the same. And again, thanks everyone for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.